Hello to whoever is watching. My name is Shulin. I am an energy healer and mentor, and you can visit me at shulinaurora.com to see how to work with me if you become interested in that. Today, I wanted to talk about questions and asking questions. I always think of the statement, ask and ye shall receive. I am not religious, but I am spiritual. And when in my early years of getting into healing, one of my first mentors, who is a dear, dear friend of mine right now, when I used to bring things to her, this was sort of in my early 20s, just things I was confused about, things I was wondering about. And she would just say, ask, ask. And it just made so much sense when she would say it. And what she meant by that was ask God, ask the universe, ask the higher power, the all that is. Just ask. And it just made so much sense. And I knew that when she said that, what she meant was not only ask, but also you will be answered. And I was, and I have been, and I continue to be answered over and over and over again. Now, the thing about asking questions is that the answers don't necessarily come right away, but they do come. And they don't necessarily come in the language that we are used to, our day-to-day way that we typically are used to speaking human to human. But it's a wonderful teaching in terms of learning how to speak, communicate, hear, perceive, utilize all of our senses and receive information in many different ways. And that is really the basis of working with energy. Sometimes I talk with my friends, my colleagues, clients about the ways that the universe speaks. And I know many people teach about this. It could come through really whatever spirit or the universe knows will land with us. So I know that sometimes license plates are actually a language or numbers or words or phrases that you hear people say, or even billboards. I've had that happen. Or someone that you're speaking with may just say the thing that you have been needing to hear. So a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times it will start with a question. And I wanted to share two times in particular that were quite poignant in my own life when I actually did ask a very clear question and the unfoldings of my life became the answer. So the first time was, again, in my early 20s. I was practicing and teaching yoga. And I was practicing and teaching Bikram yoga full time. I had gone to teacher training right after college. And I came back and I was teaching full time in the San Francisco Bay Area, so between San Francisco and Berkeley. And I was having the time of my life. I was teaching 10 classes a week among 4 different studios. And I was practicing 1 to sometimes 4 times a day. And it was so much fun. I was driving all over the area, finding the best teachers, making friends, and just having a great time, and also conditioning my body quite a lot. So I did become quite proficient in many of the physical postures. And as many of us know, yoga is so much more than the postures. That being said, it felt amazing. I was experiencing my body in ways I never had before. And simultaneously, I had also started meditating regularly. I didn't really know much about meditation. I had read a book called Zen Mind, Beginner Mind, and the instruction was very simple. It was just sit, just sit. So I did. I just sat. I talk about this in another video that I made about me, but I just sat. Sometimes I would even slip out in between the classes that I was teaching and taking, and I would set my timer for about anywhere 10, 15, 20 minutes, and I would just sit. And it was very calming to my mind, calming to my body. And I even started to have very profound experiences that I really didn't understand. I didn't know something very profound was happening. I thought I was falling asleep. My head would start to nod. I would go, it was like I fell asleep and then I would wake up. And I also experienced what I described as feeling punched in the heart. It just felt like these punches in my heart. But I know now what was happening were energy openings throughout my energy body. So, all of this put together, I was experiencing states of consciousness without really realizing it. But what ended up happening was I was becoming proficient in yoga postures. I was able to balance on one leg. I was able to twist myself up into various positions. I would be in a class and able to do the posture and just kind of hang out in it while other people maybe were struggling next to me. And I was just, I'm twisted up and I'm balancing on one foot and waiting for the next posture. And one day, a light bulb just went off, and I thought to myself, okay, what does this matter? What does it matter that I can twist myself up into a posture and balance on one leg? How am I going to be a good person? And the moment I asked that, something just opened in my heart. And after that, a lot changed in my life. I just started waking up to things. I also started having experiences, meeting people, just a lot opened up for me. And in particular, a yoga teacher friend of mine recommended a form of body work to me. It was called Heller work at the time. And I ended up finding a practitioner in my area and working with her. And I immediately signed up for a full 12-week sequence. And as she and I were getting to know each other, and I was having profound openings throughout my body and in my energy system, she just happened to recommend to me a class. And it was at the Church of Religious Science. It was a foundations class. So I said, sure, why not? I went over there and I signed up for the class because that was how I did things. So I started this class. It was with the Reverend who was at the church. Her name was Reverend Joan Stedman, who ended up becoming a very significant mentor in my life and in my journey, and especially at that time. And as I was taking this class, things started to, as I said, open up for me. I started meeting different people, connecting at a different level. My heart started to awaken and open up. And I didn't really understand that was what was happening at the time. But as I look back, I can see very clearly that's what was happening. And my question, how am I going to be a good person? What does it matter that I'm balancing on one leg, twisting myself up? It was getting answered. I met another friend who became a partner at the time, and I started having deeper relationships with people around me. I started just noticing how I was feeling on the inside and the outside. I was feeling amazing in my body from all the yoga that I was doing, but at the same time, I was feeling this emptiness and this loneliness. And I began to find community that I was resonating with much more. And I started to learn things and sit through teachings that were guiding me in connecting with my consciousness, connecting with other people. How to really be present with people, and also how to experience life in a whole other way. So it was really special. Now, I will say that it wasn't so easy because as I started to wake up inside and my heart began to awaken, and what happened was I was having this experience where what I was seeing on the outside, the way my life was set up on the outside, what I had built in my life on the outside, and also what I had learned. Um, for example, what many of us learn: go to school, get a good job, make money, buy a house, buy a car, get married, have kids, just that traditional pathway, which I wasn't doing, by the way, but I felt somewhat subject to it. But what I saw on the outside, it wasn't lining up with what I was starting to feel on the inside. And what was really happening was I was starting to feel on the inside, and I was making choices based on what felt right on the inside, but it didn't seem to match up on the outside. Well, long story short, going from stepping stone to stepping stone and following what felt right, I began to take the pieces of my life as it was apart. Now, it was very scary for me because that was everything to me. It was my job, it was my family, it was my community, it was how I identified with myself. And as I took those pieces apart, that version of me began to die. And I did not know how to deal with that. And it felt like a complete life breakdown. But as we learn on the spiritual path, life breakdowns or any kind of breakdown also clears the way for a breakthrough. And that is what happened. And through multiple twists and turns, I ended up landing at a meditation ashram. And when I did, I started meeting people and community that I just felt so resonant with. My entire life, I had felt so different and so weird. Um, but I started meeting people who actually cared so much about spirituality, who were building their lives around their spiritual path. And the things that I was talking about, my meditation experiences, other people were talking about as well. And life started to make much more sense. And as I started going to the ashram and doing the practices, chanting, meditation, and also offering service, and actually began working there, um, and really integrating into the community. And it almost felt a little bit like a life rehab. And at the same time, I was receiving teachings and training in yoga philosophy and also basic life skills. And it was sort of like the first time in my life bringing everything together. So instead of having sort of the so-called mundane aspects of life, your job, your family, your day-to-day routines, and then separate from that, your spirituality, it all became one life, one path. And it felt so good. Finally, I felt like, I have landed. This makes sense. This feels so resonant to me. It was still a little bit different from, other people who were not following a spiritual path like that. But I had community for the first time in my life that I could speak to about these things and that I felt resonant with. And it just changed everything for me. And, it came in a very rocky way for me at that time. People that may have been, around my Saturn return time, if you're into astrology, but essentially it was a complete life breakdown for a breakthrough and for a rebuild. Now, after that, many other twists and turns came, and I had some other breakdowns for breakthroughs. And that just happens to be a little bit of my life. Well, they've gotten a little bit softer over time. But that was the first one where I really realized, oh my gosh, this all just started from me asking a question. Now, I also think that question was divinely guided. And I, as a soul in a human body on my journey, it was almost like a time capsule. It just was ready to be opened up. And for me to experience all of that and be on that journey, it was hard. It was very, very hard. It taught me a lot. Um, but it was such a huge experience of ask and you shall receive. So fast forward, I spent about 6 years at that ashram between California and New York. And then at a certain point, I felt guided to leave the safety of those four walls and take the teachings out into the world, so to speak. And it's continued to be a work in progress of putting into practice what I believe in, what I know to be true, what are my values, um, and living a life of alignment, essentially. So, years after that, after coming into the so called world and setting up life, I had been through quite a lot of life. But another question came to mind. So, I had been through a couple of partnerships, been through some death, caretaking, grief, selling a house, moving, a lot of things. I'll just put it that way. If you took the list of major life events, there were quite a few that I checked off in probably about 5 or 6 years, and that was a lot. So I landed in a place where I had the opportunity to sort of look into what do I really want to do. I had sold a house, I was working, I was living in another house that I owned, and I had kind of landed there to see what I wanted to do next, but I didn't know. And this question came to mind, how how do I invest my energy for the highest return? And And I kept reflecting on this, like what do I really want to do and what's going to give back to me the most? And it was all about my energy. And I realize even now that I didn't fully know even what I was asking, but I was asking. So I that question morphed into how do I invest my energy for the highest return of aliveness? You hear about return on investment, right? And usually that has to do with money. Um, but what about our attention and our energy and what we are actually investing ourselves in terms of our life? What gives us back the most joy and the most sense of being alive? So I started asking these questions and twists and turns again. And I was lucky enough to test positive for COVID and have that actually kick off in my system autoimmune. And it showed up as chronic fatigue and Epstein-Barr. So, whereas many people, not everyone, some people are still dealing with long COVID. Um, but whereas some people close to me, we had all sort of tested positive around the same time and, they got better. They recovered within 10 days to a couple weeks. And my system was shot, probably because of a lot that I had been through that I had not processed through my system. So my nervous system was just, that was like the final flicker or time bomb or whatever you want to call it that just really set it off. And I had intense lung sensitivity, fatigue. I couldn't go into most stores or a lot of public environments because of the dust. It would start to irritate my lungs very easily. So I ended up cocooning in my apartment. And thankfully, I had a practitioner and mentor who really nursed me back to health, step by step, one step at a time. And I can go into that a little bit of what my protocols were, which were very unique to me, but it can just give you a sense of some things that worked to help me recover slowly over time. But essentially, it was very interesting because when I really look back on that time, our blessings and the answers, the way the universe responds to us isn't always, well, it's probably rarely going to be the way that we think it's going to be. And sometimes it can be in ways that we feel like are the worst thing that could have ever happened to us. When I got quote unquote sick, I call it that, and I can explain that a little later also. But when I got sick, it just felt like, what is happening? I've been healthy my entire life. How could this happen to me? I had just caretaken two partners. I had two relationships consecutively where I caretook over the course of a few years each. And how could this happen to me? I just took care of two sick people, and now I'm in the seat of sick. This is so unfair. This is so awful. Body, how could you do this to me? It was hard. It was really, really hard. I had to let go of most things in my life. I stopped working. I stopped doing the things day to day that I love to do. I stopped going to the yoga studio. I stopped teaching. I stopped everything. There was a time in my life where I had nothing to do all day long except take care of myself. Now, I will also say that I was extremely fortunate, extremely blessed that I had a home, that I had resources, and that I had support through my practitioner to guide me and tell me exactly what to do. I mean, how perfect is that for the scenario that I would not wish on anybody? It was still perfection and very, very blessed. And boy, did I do the work. There were days where I had ended up with, I calculated it, I had 8 hours plus of protocols that I was doing to manage my health, to nurture my energy, and to try to restore my natural healing process and my innate life force to bring myself back to health, which ultimately I would say worked. And I'll talk about that maybe in another video. Actually, I can go into a little bit more about that. But essentially, what I realized is that my question, and maybe we call it a prayer also, my question was being answered. How do I invest my energy for the highest return on aliveness? I mean, how perfect is that? That my condition is all around my energy. And when I didn't have very much, when I had very little energy, it became so precious that I was not going to sacrifice it for anything. I had to make choices based on, would this amplify, would this nourish, nurture, and amplify my energy? Or is this going to take away from my energy? And it was so black and white. It was so either or. Either this helps me or it doesn't. And that applied to activities in my life, that applied to food I was eating, that applied to environments I was in, and that applied to people in my life. And everything was okay. It just became crystal clear, yes or no. And if it's not a yes, it is a no. And it became so defined. And my question was being answered. And I'll just add that at one point, I just felt so at a loss. How could my body betray me like this? I have always been healthy. I have always been the strong one, physically and emotionally and mentally. And then it hit me that I had been dragging my body through so much for so long that finally my body said, no, I'm not doing this anymore. Stop. I'm not doing it anymore. And I realized, okay, I got it. Okay. Okay, you're speaking loudly to me, and I am going to partner with you. So it has been quite a journey to transition and change so many things in my life, and I'm still changing things, but I have found a foundation that works for me for now. And it is so much about energy management. And it is so much not only about energy management, because I don't believe that energy is limited. However, I am very sensitive to what nurtures, nourishes, and amplifies my energy and what doesn't. And if it doesn't do any of those three things and it takes away from it, it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. And it's okay. It's okay. You know, I am the makeup that I am. It's taken me years to embrace that, and I'm still learning. And I will forever learn. We will all forever learn who we are because we are ever evolving, ever changing, ever becoming. But it was such a beautiful teaching for me. And again, I wouldn't wish that way of answering the question on anybody. However, I do recognize the ways that everything that happens in our lives is for us. And asking a question is such a beautiful opening to connecting with spirit and allowing the universe to answer us, and it will be answered. And so, what I want to encourage is to notice what's on your mind, your heart, and what is the question there, and to ask it, and then to be patient and to listen and be curious and almost play a little bit with allowing the answers to come to you. Sometimes people talk about this like asking for a sign. You could do that. And sometimes it's a question. And there's a lot of ways to ask the question. Sometimes it's just very simple. And sometimes it's fun to get a little clearer. You know, some people say the clearer your question, the clearer your answer. Now, I will also say that the universe knows our heart. God knows our heart. So sometimes we don't know what the clear question is, and that is okay too. Sometimes the answer comes as the question, getting the clarity of what the question is. And sometimes even just finding the clarity of that question can be so momentous in itself. It's like, yes, that is what I'm looking for. That is what I'm asking. And then we just leave it up to the universe. And it can come in so many different ways. It can come in the form of a dream. It can come in the form of a conversation you have with someone. It can come in the form of a license plate, a billboard, a TV commercial, an Instagram post. Who knows? But it's so incredible, right? To witness our journey and delight in the mystery. And almost sometimes I like to call it like the movie that is unfolding in real time in our lives. And I'm getting this little tone right now in my ear, which has been happening quite a bit, that I know um, anyway comes at these poignant times when a good point is being made that's aligned with spirit. So I just want to encourage, I wanted to share some of my stories, and maybe I should come up with some stories that weren't as difficult, because that has been the case also. I think as I have come more into alignment, presence with myself, honesty with myself, the lessons have gotten less hard. They were a lot harder in earlier years in my life, maybe because that's just how I needed to learn them. Maybe because I was so thick-skulled, or it's just what finally got my attention. And the other thing is that as we develop our abilities, our sensitivity, our ability to be aware and aware that we are aware and pay attention and follow those divine inspirations, we don't need the universe or anybody yelling and screaming at us to get our attention, right? We can pick up on the subtleties, and we don't need to go into crisis mode in order to learn the lessons that our souls have brought us here to learn. So I hope this helps somebody. And if you are working on your questions and you'd like to share them with me, you're welcome to. Or even if you've had experiences where you've asked a question and just held it open in consciousness, or with curiosity, and allowing spirit to answer that for you in some way, and you'd like to share, please put a comment. We'd love to see that. And if you'd like to connect one-to-one, if you're working on something, you want some support around finding clarity in your life, there are many different ways that we can work together. So please reach out. And I'm sending you so much love.